Hi, my name's Emma, and I'm a huge book nerd.
You're my library, always open for business, but you never show it. You're just sitting with it, but I know the score, and you're killing it.
It has been a minute. It feels like it's been a minute anyways. I think it's only been like, I don't know, a week and a half, something like that. But it's been a long week and a half. So I am now finally getting to you with my October wrap-up. I know it's late, but better late than never, right? And I still want to talk about these books, so here we go. I'm just going to hop right into it. So this month I read 9 things. I say things because there are a lot of plays, and like plays are really short, and like, yeah. Anyways, so I did read 1 arc this month, which is very exciting, and I cannot wait to tell you about that one. But we'll just start from the beginning of October and work our way to the end of October. So the first book I read in October is The Mountain Between Us by Charles Martin. And I read this because the movie was coming out in October and I wanted to see if I wanted to go see it, and turns out I didn't. This wasn't a bad book. This book was okay. I ended up giving it 2 stars for several reasons. First of all, it's a survival story, which I do really like, which gets it 1 star. And it's not badly written, so that gets it another star. There were a lot of issues with this though. First of all, the ending is clearly supposed to be a big twist, but honestly, like, I called it from like the 2nd chapter. I will not spoil you on it in case you want to try to be surprised, but I called it like right away. And I was like, I know this is how it's gonna end. Don't end this way. And then it did end that way. And I was like, well, that's dumb. And then the other big issue I had with this is that it was like really sexist, which was weird. It was just very sexist in the sense that it was extremely focused, like a recurring thing that kept coming up over and over again was the fact that she wasn't shaving her legs. Now, let me reiterate, they are lost in the wilderness. Her leg is broken, like snapped, and he's dragging her on a sled, and he's growing a beard. He's not shaving either, yet they keep making comments about how she's not shaving her legs and like how gross it is. And I'm like, seriously? Like, that's what you're worried about when you are literally dying? Like, it was just really weird. Just why? Like, why? That's all I have to say about that. Yeah. If you don't think that's gonna bother you, then it's kind of a fun survival story. So the next book I read in October is a very October-themed book, and that's Pet Sematary by Stephen King. And this is actually not one of my favorite Stephen Kings. I thought I was really gonna like this. I've heard a lot of good things. I didn't actually think it was that scary. Like, the last like 50 pages were pretty terrifying, but the rest of it wasn't as well constructed as most Stephen King books are. I feel like usually his characters are so in-depth and so well-rounded and so interesting, which is why I like his books so much. And in this one, it just felt like it was horror for the sake of horror, which isn't my thing. I like his characters, and like, most of his other books, there's like a story that would stand by itself outside of the horror, and in this it was not the case. So, not my favorite, but a great book for October. It's very Halloween, which I did enjoy. I gave it 3 stars, so it's good. It's definitely not a bad book. Like, it's still Stephen King, so it's still good, but it's not amazing. And then I read my 2nd book out of my Capsule Books box, and that is A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. And I loved this. This, I think, is my favorite book that I read this month. I gave it 4 stars. It was just really touching and beautiful, and it made me think really hard. Like, the difference between like the Western way of thinking and the Eastern way of thinking, like at its core, is so interesting to me. Like, after reading this and the other Japanese book that came in the Capsule Books box, this idea of like I mean, I could be wrong, I'm not an expert, so like, don't take my word for it, but it seems like the mindset of Eastern thinking is more about like living in the time being, as it says, and like living in the present and like being focused on the now. And the Western way of thinking is so much more like goal-oriented, like you have to achieve something, you're constantly working towards something, you're looking forward to the next step, and you're not living in the now. It's just really fascinating to look at how the two cultures view things differently and how the two cultures have different values like at the core. And I just thought that this was brilliant and like a little mind-bending and just really, really great. I highly recommend this one. I saw it around a lot before I got it in my capsule books box, but I didn't have like a strong desire to pick it up. On a remote island in the Pacific Northwest, a Hello Kitty lunchbox washes up on the beach. Tucked inside is the diary of a 16-year-old Japanese girl named now Yasutani. Ruth, a writer who finds the lunchbox, suspects that it is debris from Japan's 2011 tsunami. Once she begins to read the diary, Ruth quickly finds herself drawn into the mystery of Nao's fate. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, Nao, uprooted from her home in the US, bullied at school, and watching her parents spiral deeper into disaster, has decided to end her life. But first, she wants to recount the story of her great-grandmother, a 104-year-old Zen Buddhist nun, in the pages of her secret diary. I mean, the synopsis does sound interesting, but the book is also so much more. If you've been considering it, I would recommend picking it up. It's really great. So next is the arc that I read, and that is The Queen of Hearts by Kimmery Martin. This book is about two female surgeons, and they're like in their 30s, and they're still best friends, and they have a past that they've never really talked about. That kind of we know at the beginning something really bad happened in their past that we like don't know about yet, and that comes out throughout the story. This was very reminiscent of Grey's Anatomy to me. Like, there are a lot of characters that draw parallels between like the characters in the book and the characters in Grey's Anatomy. So if you're a Grey's Anatomy fan, I really, really think you would like this book. I also do really appreciate that it's two female surgeons who are very successful professionally and doing their thing. I think that's great. I did have some issues with, they talked a lot about like their physical appearance and how they're both like smoking hot, and I was like, why you gotta bring that into that? They're surgeons, they're smart, brainy women, why do you gotta bring that into that? But it wasn't like offensive, it was just something that I noticed and was like, really? But it didn't get in the way of the story. So yeah, I ended up giving it 3 stars because for me, I like Grey's Anatomy, but I'm not a huge fan. It was a good book, but there was nothing remarkable about it to me. But if you're a Grey's Anatomy fan, I do really think you would like this. So I do recommend it if you love Grey's Anatomy. If you don't, then it's fun, and the cover's really pretty. You might want to check it out. The release date is sometime in 2018. I couldn't find the exact release date, but it's 2018. All right, the next book that I read for class, and that was Othello by William Shakespeare. And I mean, it's Shakespeare, so it's really great. It's really interesting the way he deals with race in Othello, because the time period, like the society that it's set in, is very racist, and the time period he wrote it in is very racist. When you look at it, you could certainly debate that Shakespeare himself was not racist, which is very interesting considering the society he lived in. Just with, like, for one example, I won't talk too much about it, but Iago being like the villain of all villains, like the most villainous of all the Shakespeare villains, to contrast and show that Othello, the Middle Eastern man, is not the villain in the story. It is Iago, and you cannot argue otherwise because Iago is so, like, purely evil. That's really interesting. Food for thought. If you haven't read Othello or seen it, you should, because it's a classic Shakespeare. Next, also for class, I read The Duchess of Malfi by John Webster, and I actually really, really liked it. I tend to really like Elizabethan plays, but The Duchess of Malfi was really interesting. We have this really strong female main character, protagonist, the Duchess herself, and she is a widow and she remarries against her brother's wishes, and that gets her killed, and it's very tragic because it is a tragedy. And it's really interesting, and I did a whole paper on it, so like I could talk to you about how cool it is, but I won't. I gave it 4 stars. It's really good, and if you get a chance to see it performed somewhere, I highly recommend you do so. If you have the patience to read an Elizabethan play that's not Shakespeare, then I would recommend reading The Duchess of Malfi because it is really good. Next, I read Galileo by Bertolt Brecht for another one of my classes, and this one I liked okay. I don't know, I didn't really connect to it. It just felt very basic. I don't know. I read it for my Science on Stage class, so like this definitely was interesting in the context of the class, but as a play standing alone, I just wasn't really feeling it. There's that. Next, I read also on my phone, not technically an ARC, but like kind of an ARC, brand new. It's The Music Shop by Rachel Joyce, and this came out in July 2017. Rachel Joyce also wrote The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry, which I love. The Music Shop was also really, really good. A close runner-up for my favorite book of the month. It's just like really beautiful. It's a man who owns a record store, and he has this ability to know exactly what music people need in their lives at the moment. So he touches people in that way. And then one day, a woman in a green coat shows up and faints outside his shop. And he's fascinated by her, and she's like a little bit, there's just something about Rachel Joyce's books that's like a little bit magical and like a little bit outside of our natural world, which I think is really cool. She does some cool stuff with it. I cried at the end of this book as well. If you haven't tried any Rachel Joyce, I would start with The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry, but this one's also really good, so add it to your TBR list. Then, technically in the beginning of November, but I'm gonna count it because I read it before I filmed this video. It's Inherit the Wind by Jerome Lawrence and Robert E. Lee, and this is a play about a court case deliberating the legality of teaching the theory of evolution in schools in the early 1900s. And this was so good. I also read this for my Science on Stage class. I loved it, honestly. Like, I really, really, really liked this one. I started reading it and then like I had to go do something, but then when I got back from doing that thing, I picked up at like scene 2 and then read straight through the end because I was just sucked in. I love courtroom dramas because the arguments are just like so well articulated and thought out because lawyers. But this was really, really good. It kind of a little bit reminiscent of like 12 Angry Men in the sense that you get that like those really good arguments going on. But yeah, I really, really liked this. If you haven't read it or seen it, I would recommend picking it up. And the nice thing about plays is that they're real short. This is 130 pages and like it's not like text all the way through, you know, it's like you're reading dialogue, so it's not that bad. You can absolutely read this in like an hour and a half. Easy. I gave it 5 stars. Then a couple mentions. I have been doing the book club on Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. That's still going. It's been like a little rocky the past couple weeks because I've been so busy, but I am currently on page 179. Which is about a little over halfway through the book. I think I'm gonna have people read up to like maybe page 200 for after Thanksgiving break, and then we can like pick up and finish it off before Christmas. That's my goal, we'll see. But this is a really good book if you want to like hop in on the book club. We're halfway through the book, so I mean like if you're a fast reader, you're welcome to hop in. It's on Goodreads. I'm not an expert at running book clubs on Goodreads, but if you're interested, let me know down in the comments and I'll like give you the link to the group. I don't know, it's hard, okay. But yeah, this is really great so far. This is my second time reading it, by the way, and it's really great the second time, so. And finally, an honorable mention, I didn't read this month, but I just closed this play yesterday, and it's The Tall Girls by Meg Miroshnik. And oh my goodness, this play, I know I mentioned it briefly a couple videos back and I said that it was like good. I just like didn't know the play well enough, and now that I like actually have looked at it and like seen it up and been in it, oh my goodness, this is genius. It's so beautiful. It's the story of a girls basketball team in the 1930s in the Dust Bowl, and how their lives are so hard and they turn to basketball to live, basically. It's like their escape from their really hard lives. And then because they're women, basketball's taken away from them and they're not allowed to play anymore. And oh, it's just, oh, it's so sad. I cried very hard several times in that process. But yeah, if you ever have the chance to read this or see it, please do. It's such an important story. So beautiful, so good. Oh, I'm gonna miss it. So those are all the books that I read in October and like the very, very, very beginning of November. I'm probably going to film my November TBR like right now, but thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe and comment down below, and I am happy to be back.